of a sedentary lifestyle. And I guess the first place to start here is to make sure we understand this concept, right? Sedentary, it's an interesting word. So I want to refer to it as this, is that spending too much time, this is time, believe it or not, sitting or lying down. Okay, now you might want to think about what kind of lifestyle might lead to that. Yes, we can say someone who's a bit lazy, fine, but let's park that a second. Think about what schools cause young people to do. Think about what workplaces cause adults to do a lot of the time. Think about the amount of work that people do that make them fatigued and tired and what that might lead to. Think about this as a notion within that context. Yes, there's always the person that kind of opts out, but if we are very, very busy, if we are sitting down all the time because we're in a classroom, we're at a desk, then of course that's going to be problematic. But what I want to do here is I want to remind you of what people should be doing. If we are talking about adults, with adults we are talking about per week 4 times 30 minutes, okay? So 5 times 30 minutes a week is the recommended activity. If we have underneath, by the way, this is for activity, not for sitting or lying down, by the way. So if we are underneath that, we could describe this person as sedentary. If we're talking about children, and this is, I realize you guys definitely don't consider yourselves children anymore, but you might want to consider that children are recommended to be doing 7 times, so daily, 60 minutes of activity. Now, you might want to just reflect on that, because that might put a whole group of people into that sort of sedentary category that you might not previously have thought would be. But what I want to do is I want to spend the majority of our time today talking about the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. So if we sit down, if we lie down for too much in our life, what happens to us? So some of the things are real obvious, okay? So we get falls in fitness. That's not going to be a surprise to you. Remember, fitness is the capacity to meet the daily activities or meet the demands of daily activities. So fitness is going to reduce. We're going to become effectively unfit. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. And within this context, we get an increased chance of muscle damage. Muscle tone, for example, decreases. We may well find that, especially if we then become active, muscles may become damaged more easily. Second point, we may experience things like injuries more frequently. Now, you might want to think about what kind of injuries they might be. I'm going to refer to things such as strains. Remember, this person might actually be heavier as well. They could experience joint problems because A, those joints are not being moved as much, so that kind of lubrication of the release of synovial fluid from the synovial membrane might not be as typical. And also, this person might be a bit heavier than they would like to be. Okay, so this is going to put a strain on those joints. And also, with injury, it's going to tend to be caused by things that are weight-bearing, okay, such as walking, running, sporting activity, going on a treadmill, whatever it happens to be. We're not going to tend to find that someone who is sedentary, maybe a bit overweight, is as likely to experience this if they do non-weight bearing things like cycling or swimming, for example. Let's look at our next consequence. We're moving more into that sort of direct health side now. They might have a greater chance of experiencing coronary heart disease or CHD. Examples: angina, which is pain or tightness across the chest because there is restriction to blood flow through the coronary arteries. They might experience what we refer to as atheroma. Atheroma is literally blockages in blood vessels, plaque, fatty deposits in blood vessels, which leads to an increase in restriction of blood flow, and we'll see in a second, blood pressure increases. And we might experience, even in extreme cases, well, even not that extreme to be honest, heart attack. Now, you could go posh here and call it a myocardial infarction if you want. Google it if you're interested. But heart attack is an issue for someone who is very sedentary and perhaps moving towards states like obesity. Now, I mentioned blood pressure here. Blood pressure is, or let's say elevated blood pressure, is a problem for people in a sedentary position. So first of all, it gets higher, and secondly, we refer to that high blood pressure as hypertension. Okay, so try and include that if you can. And why? Because we might be experiencing these atheromas, these blockages in blood flow. That's going to increase resistance to blood flow, increase blood pressure itself, and this is quite damaging because it can be quite dangerous for things like the elastic properties of arteries, for example. So ongoing high blood pressure is something that must be medicated, and for life, interestingly. Let's keep going. We're almost there. Let's focus here, I've mentioned it a couple of times, on obesity. Okay, so let's remind ourselves, obesity is a BMI of greater than 30. I'm not going to get into calculating BMI today, but again, go and have a look at it if you want to. It's a very, very simple equation, but a BMI of over 30, by the way, between 25 and 30 would be considered overweight. Over 30 is considered obese, and over 35 is morbidly obese, so obesity potentially causing death effectively. So what causes this? Well, it's not a particularly pleasant thing to say, but it's caused by excess fat. Okay, so that's what we're referring to, and it increases, as we've mentioned already, the chance of CHD, coronary heart disease. Chances go up. Why? Because we're likely to be building atheroma. We might be suffering angina, and a heart attack might be closer. Let's put it that way. Let's keep going. We're almost there. Couple more. I want to talk to you about type 2 diabetes. It's a concept I think you've probably come across. Type 2 diabetes can loosely be referred to as lifestyle diabetes, and it causes a down arrow reduction in the production of insulin, which of course is the hormone that moderates glucose levels in the blood. So therefore we get an increase in blood glucose. Now, you will be studying glucose in all sorts of contexts in your biology and all sorts of things, but if we have high blood sugar, blood glucose levels, it can be damaging to our vascular system. So I'll leave it there for today. Now finally, let's move on here. Let's talk about posture and our physicality. And the point we want to make here about posture, think about upright, correct, arch back. It can have negative impacts. So it can, let's put it this way, this sedentary lifestyle, weaken the core, so the muscles of the abdominals, the other muscles in there, we don't study them on this course, but the transversus, for example, also the back, the erector spinae, and it can lead to conditions like bad back. So all in all, what do we have here? We have a picture that, being sedentary is not particularly good for one. Let's put it that way. How do we remedy that? Well, it's kind of simple. We stay active 5 times a week for 30 minutes as an adult. We stay active as a child. I don't know where we draw the line between child and adult. I guess you guys are right on the cusp of both. But if in doubt, 7 lots of an hour once a week. I'll rephrase that. 60 minutes per day, every day, so 7 times a week. That is going to ward off the consequences of this sedentary lifestyle. And guys, as children, as young people, as teenagers, it's relatively easy to be active. Varies on one's specific circumstances. As you get older, work commitments, family, children, that's where it becomes much more challenging. Okay, so try and think forward. You might think, well, I'm super active now. And you might have that indestructible mentality of, I'll always be this way. But try and think forward as to what might be the case in 10, in 15, in 20, 25 years. I know it seems a long way off. Trust me, it comes round. So you might want to think forward. Cheers.